Hello, everyone. It is such a pleasure to welcome you here on this hot, relatively warm day, and also to welcome two of my favorite people, extraordinary artists and Berkeley alums who have inspired so many of us for many years and in various regions of the world. Bruce and Stan are both artists that lots of people and lots of organizations like to claim. Curators like to claim them, producers like to claim them, museums, theaters, biennials, and we at UC Berkeley like to claim them too. They are, one of them moved here in the early 60s from Dartmouth to join UC Berkeley's art department when he realized he could no longer refuse the call of sculpture. And another one of them came later as a graduate student in order to learn more deeply about the history and techniques of theater making in the United States. And since their Berkeley careers, they have left and largely transformed in many ways the different art landscapes in which they work. Many of you know that Bruce Beasley's early career was quite precocious. Beginning before he even graduated here, the Treehouse was selected for inclusion in MoMA's 1961 exhibition, The Art of Assemblage, which a very famous exhibition that is taught routinely in 20th century art history courses. MoMA acquired chorus soon after, making him the youngest artist ever to be represented in their collection. He enjoyed his first solo gallery exhibition also at that time, and that same year, still a student, barely, out of here, he not only appeared in the Paris Biennial, but won the Purchase Prize from the French Minister of Culture. So precocious starts like that don't always yield long-term careers, but in this case, we have an exceptional situation. Bruce Beasley has managed to expand and sustain a career of continued curiosity and innovation for over 55 years. He extended abstract expressionist principles and practices of assemblage into what is truly his own vocabulary. That quest for form and feeling prompted him to fashion new fabrication processes in order to fabricate new forms. That also happened to mean collaborating with scientists and engineers in order to develop new processes of industrial construction. Beasley's practice is one where art and science meet and transform each other. Beasley was not content to confine himself to certain materials, even materials whose arrangement had earned him so much acclaim, and he pushed himself to more, began to give himself new parameters, working with steel, wood, granite, bronze casts, and his processes have expanded even more recently, including now 3D printing. The list of museums, private collections, and cities that own or have commissioned works by Beasley is so long, I won't recount them all, but they include prestigious sites such as LA County, MFA Houston, MoMA New York, SF MoMA, the National Museum of Art in Washington, D.C., the Guggenheim, and most recently, Beasley has given a major bequest of his works and his studios to our beloved neighbor, the Oakland Museum of California. And now also Beasley's works, as many of you know, pieces from the Rondo series can be found on the grounds of our own campus. One of them will stay permanently, floating before the entry of Hearst Landing Building. Stan Lai Shangxuan, has been heralded by the international press as the best Chinese language playwright and director in the world. The New York Times called one of his plays, Secret Love in Peach Blossom Land, the most popular contemporary play in China, and I'm very pleased that Stan will begin rehearsals, I think, tomorrow for another American staging of that play at the Ashland Theater Festival. Stan is really the author of some 35 plays and a best-selling book on creativity, that's our theme for today. And he's received Taiwan's National Arts Award an unprecedented 2 times. Also, he was inducted by President Ma into the Chinese Theater Hall of Fame in 2011. He was a professor at Taipei National University of the Arts, where he was founding dean of the College of Theater, and has in that role and subsequently had a profound influence on a majority of theater professionals who work in Taiwan and beyond today. As co-founders of the Performance Workshop, Stan and his spouse, Nai Chu Ding, are rightly credited with revolutionizing theatrical practice in East Asia, turning the theater space into an intercultural laboratory that joins Euro-American and East Asian performance traditions. His famous crosstalk plays have not only been produced worldwide, but continue to serve as springboards for developing the expressive and collaborative skills of emerging theater artists today. His play, The Village, embodies the fragile intimacies and fraught politics of cross-strait relationships in Taiwan and China, and has been called the pinnacle of our era of theater by Beijing News. And I'm proud to say that his epic 8-hour masterpiece, A Dream Like a Dream, began when he served as an artist in residence here at UC Berkeley in 2000, and now inspires pilgrimages, really, from world citizens who are compelled to see it. It should be said that Lai's artistry goes beyond theater as well. He's written and directed widely acclaimed feature films, including The Peach Blossom Land and The Red Lotus Society. His improvisational experiment in television, All in the Family Are Humans, was a huge hit on Taiwan TV and ran for 600 episodes. He's also directed innovative versions of Western classics, including An Evening of Samuel Beckett or Mozart's Così fan tutte at the Shanghai Opium Den, a Chinese language world premiere of Tony Kushner's Angels in America, which he also translated. In 2009, Lai created the acclaimed opening and closing ceremonies for the International Deaf Olympic Games in Taipei, and he's recently created a new rock opera for the centennial celebration of the Republic of China in October 2011, so he's not afraid of spectacle. And I think I can say you've been commissioned to make a new musical based on the intercultural, can I say that? The intercultural influence and the personal story of Bruce Lee. And we'll hear about more projects as well. Stan and Bruce, we are so thrilled to have you here, that the stars aligned to have you both in the same room at the same time. I feel like the creativity quotient is going to blow the roof off of Alumni House. Okay, but having trust in its structural integrity, I hope you can join me in giving these two the warmest of welcomes. So we thought what we do is begin with a few open-ended questions just to get the ball rolling. And we'll hear from both of them and let them talk to each other around some questions about art making, about creativity, about what it is to be, have the kind of careers that they do now. And then we'll open it up for questions, okay? So keep them at the ready. So first of all, Bruce and Stan, I think a lot of times when people even begin to imagine an artistic process, they're wondering how you even begin. How do you allow yourself to begin? How do you know that a new work is in formation? What are those first moments? What inspires you to begin? And have you ever been afraid to start a new project?
Well, I'm not an artist who sees finished works in my head ahead of time. And for a long time, I felt that meant I was inadequate and didn't really have it, because there's all this romance about Michelangelo looking at the block and seeing the figure in it and all of that. And I never did that. And I felt quite inadequate about that. What I learned for myself is that the sculptures come out of a process of discovery of shape. I'm fundamentally interested in shape itself and believe that shape is a human emotional language. Geometry is the intellectual language of shape, and sculpture is the emotional language of shape. But I don't see finished pieces, and so I had to develop for myself a process that would allow me to discover compositions that then speak to me. So I don't feel that I create the sculptures as much as I feel I discover them. And in a way, that helps the process of beginning, because if you give up the idea that you're starting something that is going to a final completion of creating a work of art, and it doesn't end up in that, then that's a failure. If you look at it as an endlessly interesting process of engaging, in just searching for responses in shapes, then it's an endless process that's always interesting. And sometimes something comes out that you might exhibit, many times not, but there's no failure in that case, and therefore no inhibition of starting.
I tend to sometimes think that the whole process is a disease because it's ongoing all the time, and it's something that I guess people like us can't shake away from. It's a disease. It's the urge to be creative. You can call it a virtue, but to me, sometimes it just gnaws at you. So anything you do, everything you see, it's all going into this constant process of seeing how you're going to make that into some sort of a production, sort of a play or whatever. I agree with Bruce very much that theater, for me, is a process of discovery. Although I have envisioned whole works in an instant, but that came later. I think at the beginning, I think what Bruce was saying about process, I find that to be, I thought immediately this is very Berkeley, or I don't know, maybe it was part of the 60s or that whole push that I believe deeply in, that the process is certainly more important than the final product. But in the end, we all have to deliver a final product. I think in Bruce's case, it's more final. In our case, it's like we announce a play, the tickets are sold, often they're sold out, and I still haven't written the play. And then we perform it because people have bought tickets to it, and then we keep refining it and keep working on it. So always, I think, the whole idea of discovering a work is incredibly precious and always interesting, because you start with something and then you don't doubt why you started, because it keeps revealing itself. And what is it revealing? It is revealing what you really care about. There's some concern in this disease that you have, that the things you see in your life, or in the news, or in your family, or whatever, or even in this room, it becomes something that you are compelled to start to work on, to write on, and often you don't know why. And then the whole process is a process of discovering not only the piece, but also the why. And once you know about the why, then the piece usually reveals itself.
Can either of you say, I don't want to put you too much on the spot, but can you recall any kind of moments where you had that sort of aha moment, that you were in process and then something kind of gelled and you were like, wait, this might be it?
Oh, yes, I mean, that has to happen. I mean,
So one of your
that
works.
doesn't happen,
Yeah. So one of your works, one of the works that, any particular, a play or a sculpture, where, was there something about how negative space appeared to you, about how something was atop something else, or?
Well, you see, I'm just constantly, basically I make a whole lot of little, what I call what ifs. What if I put this shape? What if I put that shape? And most of the response is, so what? But then a little thing happens, and it's like, I call it a heartbeat. It's like a little invitation. It's though I was wandering around in this maze, and there's a little finger down this hall that says, come this way. And then what I feel my job is to follow that little hint, that invitation. And sometimes it peters out, and other times it leads to something. But there's a point where if it leads to something, there's a point where that heartbeat turns into something that I feel it's like it's alive. And that's the closest to that really exciting, that moment, that aha, that it's like now it's the sculpture, those shapes now have a life of their own. And then the most interesting part is that how many of those can be taken out and still have it be alive, because most likely I put in too much. And so then the most interesting part is to take them out and see, it's amazing, I'll take a piece out, oh, it's still alive, it's a little bit better, it's a bit cleaner, and then I'll take one piece out and it's just like it goes dead. And it's wonderful, because that one, of course, goes back in. And then, that's when I know it's finished.
Yeah, I think for one instance of my play that started in Berkeley called A Dream Like a Dream, which turned out to be an 8-hour play, it started actually 2 months before I came to Berkeley when I was in India. And I was sitting at the Bodh Gaya stupa where Sakyamuni Buddha was enlightened 2,500 years ago. And suddenly, one evening, all these different sort of threads that I'd been thinking about for maybe 10 years that didn't necessarily have anything to do with each other, let's say 10 storylines that had nothing to do with each other, suddenly made sense that they should all come together. And it was these 10 and not those 10. It was just things that suddenly, bang, came together. It's like 10 different people assembling in one room. And it all made sense to me. And I knew in that moment that I had a very long play.
Rather than 10 little plays, you had one big long play.
Right, and I went the next day to write it out, and I just sat there in front of the stupa, where at a Buddhist sacred place, all of the people are circumambulating around the stupa in a clockwise direction. And so I would just be sitting there and watching this river this stream of people, and then people leaving and people coming back, people I knew, people I didn't know. And that gave me the organic impetus to say, to think, well, why do people circumambulate a sacred object? And that is because they want to keep the holy object in the center. And so I thought, as a theater person, the holy object actually should be our audience. So that's why I thought of putting the audience in the center, and then have our play move around the audience in a clockwise fashion.
I think we have that image. Maybe
Yeah.
we could show it.
Sure.
So it really also that you thought you had several plays, you had several storylines going, and then also in the same.
You can find one of the whole, keep going,
Oh,
see if you can find one. Maybe, anyway, that's okay.
We're alternating Beasley and Lai here. Only here, this is the
Okay, that's
first.
all right, that's okay. But probably, you can imagine if an audience, we did this in room 7, the audience in the middle and the play revolving around the audience. And this leads me to think that what Bruce was saying also about putting things in, taking things out. Actually, in that process, I just wrote it and it was pretty much, that was it. Maybe if we're talking about the ratio of used stuff to unused stuff, it was maybe 1 to 1.1. So basically everything I wrote stayed into the, yeah. So I think there are rare moments like that when a piece just materializes in one's mind. And when it does, it's a funny combination of, maybe academically we can use the terms form and content, but actually in the mind at the moment, it's one thing. It's not 2 things, it's not like, oh, I'm thinking of a theme and I'm thinking of a body for that theme or a way that theme can be expressed theatrically. It tends to happen at the same time, and I find that is the mysterious part of it, because our work, I'm sure Bruce is the same, there's an emotional aspect to it, there's a theoretical aspect to it, and then there's a craftsmanship aspect to it. And of course, we must be at a certain level of craftsmanship in order to execute the things that we think of. Otherwise, there's no way we can do that. But then, how does it all come together? I think for us, we've been working long enough to know that it just sort of happens, you know. But I think this is a process that many younger artists would be interested in knowing how to do better.
Yeah.
You know, Stan brought up something that I think is, I've always thought, although in my field, painting and sculpture are usually put in the same bag, and there's exhibitions of painting and sculpture and curators of painting and sculpture, I've really often felt that theater was much more related to sculpture than painting, because your art takes place in the same physical space as the audience, as does sculpture, and that's profoundly different from painting. And I think it's one of the magics of both of our fields, and also one of the problems, because being in the real space that you are all in, we have all those real problems of gravity and heat and real space. It's not imaginary space. But I think that that's also part of the magic of it. And I think one of the things that's interested me in your work is your use of space in a more imaginative way. I always saw the proscenium stage as kind of like a picture frame.
Right.
And in a way, it makes it safer, more distant, and getting the play out into the audience makes it a little scarier, but way more presence and authority, because then the audience, we're not safely in that screen, and then there's the real space is there where the stage ends, and then it's kind of magical space. So you're entering into your plays with the real existent same space as the audience, as we are with sculpture. And I think that gives us a lot more in common, I feel, than with painters, to be honest with you.
Certainly. What is the name of the filmmaker Tarkovsky's book? Sculpting in Time.
Mm-hmm.
But that's what we do too. In the theater, it's the same thing. The time probably is our most important tool. And that's, or medium, actually it's a medium that we sculpt, because as a director and as a playwright, I must say, I must use the very unpopular word manipulate, but we do manipulate the time that we are using so that you, the audience, will feel what we want you to feel at any given moment. I think that is our craft. When it comes to talking about theater as sculpture, certainly the proscenium stage is more than just a picture frame. It's sort of like a shopping window, like in a department store window,
Right.
which I think that's what Bruce is saying, the safety of it. You feel safe in just being a spectator and not involved in it. But once we break that window, break that frame, many magical things happen. I also recently did a piece called Dream Walk in the town of Wuzhen in China at the Wuzhen Theater Festival, where I used a cluster of old buildings. And then the audience would be moving through these houses, seeing a play, but they're not in a set space. They're moving. They're led by tour guides, basically, into the next space, the next space, the next space, and I keep seeing the scenes unfold. And to me, although I don't think of the word sculpture when I'm doing it, of course, this is certainly something, this sculpting something in time.
Yeah. So we've started to think about relationships across these art fields. You brought up something when you said that for Bruce it might be a little different when it comes to sculpture, that you have to finish, the terms of finishing maybe are different. That the sculpture gets put in a box and sent elsewhere, or there's the pressure of people having bought tickets, that tells you when a work is finished, and it just has to be, that it has to be finished then. I wonder how you know when a work is finished, or whether you whether you send it out even when you don't really feel that it's finished, or whether you've ever been in a situation where you've been afraid to send something out. How you know when to stop this process that is so compelling.
Sometimes it's very clear that we're done, and sometimes it's not, and it varies from project to project. And I recall one project I did called Strange Tales of Taiwan, which is a one-person monologue with a very wonderful actor named Dimitri that I worked with him. And on opening night, we looked at each other and said, "We're not there," you know. And people were on our back to put out a recording of it, because the previous works I'd done with him had become audio recordings that the first one we did sold 1 million copies in Taiwan. And so the businessmen are all out saying, "Yeah, we're ready with our recording material, can we come?" And we said, "No, we're not, this show is not ready." It was a 2-hour one-person monologue. And it took us about 20 performances to get it right. But we only had like 25 performances. Yeah. But we did get it right. But it's something that nags you when it's not right. And I don't know if Bruce ever has an experience like that, because for us, we do, you know, it's in a set place and time, and it's kind of like an exam, you know, and the bell rings and you have to hand in your exam. And if you're not done, actually you still have tomorrow to fix it, you know, but in the theater. So I've had many experiences like that, and to me, often the greatest chance is to redo a piece. You know, like a few years later when we're doing a revival, like I'm going to Ashland to do Secret Love in Peach Blossom Land. Again, it's a time to re-examine everything you were doing.
You plan to?
Yes, lots of rewriting that I've done.
Okay, really? So I'll have to go up.
But Bruce,
Yeah,
how can
well,
you
actually,
rewrite a
it's little
sculpture?
different. Well, I mean, we do have deadlines for exhibitions, but one of the interesting things that I learned very early was that one of the first really important artists that I knew personally and that I actually worked for was Peter Wolkes, who was here at Berkeley. And Pete was a sort of a volcanic kind of personality, and in many ways a movie star version of what an artist would be. He was dramatic and charismatic, and he worked in a kind of almost volcanic, explosive kind of way. He went through periods of not doing much and was very much driven by deadlines. Put things off, but then he would have this explosive output, sometimes just days before the show was to open, or weeks, and it would be this flurry of activity and sort of creative explosion. And I worked for him doing those, and one of the things that I learned is that I'm not that way at all. I don't like to create or make sculpture or discover sculpture under pressure. I tighten up, I get worried, I don't make good decisions, I'm not happy about it, so I just don't do it. And for me, I want the work to be done weeks, if not months ahead of time, and then I'll decide if you aren't going to be in the show. But I'm not good at working under pressure, but some people are, and I think that's one of the things that's important for young artists to figure out for themselves. My path is my path, and your path is yours. They have to find their own path. But your own rhythm of working, whether you need pressure, whether that's helpful or not, is a very, very individual aspect. I don't like it, and I freeze up, but others thrive under it.
Well, that is thinking about what conditions make you freeze and what conditions make you thrive. I wonder if we can talk about this word that we're using to title this gathering, creativity. What is it that sparks creativity? What is creativity even in the first place? It's a word that, especially here in the Bay Area, we hear a lot. It's very ubiquitous. A lot of people work as creatives in various industries. And I wonder about how you both hear this term, creativity. Is it something that we associate with artists per se, or something that anyone can have? Is it curiosity or success or risk-taking? I mean, what are its associations for you?
Well, I think it's related to talent, which is another very painful.
That's a way painful term, right?
In a way, I think creativity is related to curiosity. At least I've always felt that way. But it has to be directed. And I think that the people that end up as professional artists in any field are people who had, I think ideas come out of curiosity in the first place. And then, I think that talent is no more than having an affinity for something. I love music, but I have no affinity for it. I'm a receiver of that. But I have no skill in it, no affinity. And I think that what happens is that if there's a certain personality type that is curious, has ideas, but I have ideas about shape. And most people don't have ideas about shape. Dancers and choreographers have ideas about human movement. They think about it, it comes to them, it's a natural affinity. Poets have ideas about words. But so I think what happens is you need to start off with curiosity and having ideas, but if you don't have an affinity for that to go to, then it really isn't going to develop into something really serious.
I think creativity is a basic truth of the universe, and it's happening every moment, spontaneously, all around us. I think the energy of creativity is something that we all own, we all have, but most people have sort of blocked it, and it gets blocked at an early age by so many things, by family, by social norms and everything. And so we have to sort of relearn how to be creative, to relearn how to be like these trees in this beautiful twilight out there. They're doing things that are extremely creative at the moment, to me. So actually, as you said, Shannon, I wrote this book about creativity in Chinese. And one of the basic precepts of the book was that, actually there are just two basic precepts of the book. The first one is that we are all born with creativity, but we have blocked it. This is something I've said. So how to unlock it is to relearn how we see the world and to see how all of the habits that we've accumulated through our lives are actually habits that block creativity. And how can we recreate our habits so that our habits habitually help us be creative? The second important concept to me is that the way we teach or learn creativity has been handicapped throughout the world. Because I taught for many years, and I'm sure Bruce teaches a lot of people. Shannon, you teach. In Buddhism, there's a term that if you want to do Buddhist practice well, you have to have two things. One is called wisdom, and one is called method. So you have to have the wisdom, or if you're, let's say you're a Buddhist monk and you're chanting your mantras, and you have no idea what they mean, then you have method, but you don't have any wisdom. Then you have some people who are always talking about the Buddha nature, emptiness, blah, 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 but they don't have any practice. They don't they don't do any meditation. Then these are people with wisdom and without method. And this goes for any, if you're a businessman, you're a professor, it's the same for everything. So for a creative person, what we do as a teacher, we normally just teach method. So what happens to the wisdom aspect of that? I find it's very intriguing in the modern world. When I was writing my book, I went to the dictionaries to figure out what wisdom was. And the Webster's told me wisdom is the quality of being wise.
Very helpful.
I gave him one more chance. I went to wise. And wise said, characterized by wisdom. Okay, so I think there I found hey, we have a problem.
Yeah.
You know, we have a problem in that no one, either no one knows or no one is willing to define this thing in our modern society today. And if it's half of what creativity is, then that means that we're not getting half of that. Yeah. And the problem is, in schools, in training programs, we're all teaching method. How can we learn wisdom? And probably, to me, that should be in a different domain that we learn it. And that domain is the domain of our life instead of our learning. So, basically.
What you're saying reminds me of, we have a relatively new chancellor here who has a large focus on a number of initiatives, including the arts, and also on transforming the undergraduate experience. And it's really, I think, an interesting task that we have to give ourselves for thinking about what undergraduate education is in the 21st century. And one of the things that he said he felt you could say definitively is that whatever world they're entering, it will change again very soon. And that it will be about trying to equip citizens of the world with the dispositions that can address that and be open to it and worldly before it.
And I would see that as saying, like, if you have a center and then a periphery, everything we teach in universities, well, not everything, most things are on the periphery. And so how do we teach the center?
Yeah.
Or who is to define that center? And is it dangerous to define that center?
Right, yeah. If you worry about if you define it, you will instrumentalize it in a way.
But look at, let's say if you're a disciple of Socrates thousands of years ago, what are you learning from him? You know, I mean, if these guys were around today, they'd probably do a workshop at Berkeley, you know, for a weekend, get a certificate from them and stuff. But those disciples in the day were learning from him the only course he offered, and that course we could probably call wisdom.
Yes.
Yeah. But we don't have a department of wisdom. We don't even have a course in wisdom. You know? In fact, probably anyone who wanted to teach Wisdom 101, you know, maybe would be in trouble because you'd probably sort of create a cult or something with your ideas. I don't know.
Yeah, no. No, I think it is. It's very, very hard to figure out how to stay true to these qualities that are intangible and so necessary.
But you see the problem, if you're teaching on the periphery, then the center gets neglected, and then that's what everyone is learning.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I wonder if we could talk just a little bit more then about, you know, you could say that these are two artists who come with different methods to the extent that you are supposedly known for your prowess in two different forms, sculpture and theater. But you started to talk also about how there is more kinship than across these forms. And I'm wondering if we can just press on that just a little bit more. Stan was talking about time, about sculpting in time being a key element of your practice. Is there any way you think about sculpting time, or is time not a thing for you?
Actually, unless you do sculpture that moves, time is one of the aspects that we don't have.
That you say you don't have, right?
And actually, I'm happy to not have that. I'm dealing with enough. Maybe I'm just not deep enough to take that one on. But I think you're saying something important. I feel that I actually learn more from other art forms than I do from my own. And I think part of that is that if I respond to something in dance or theater or poetry or music, I really responded to that, and I don't have the knowledge and the professionalism that I bring to looking at sculpture. And it's very hard to be a true audience in your own field. I mean, we like to think we can, but it's hard. But for instance, I have set out to try to make shapes that would achieve an effect that I've received from another art form. I haven't always succeeded. I mean, one that comes to mind is that beautiful passage in the meditation by Masonier, the French composer, which I think is maybe the most beautiful piece of music in the world. And I've said to myself, can I make a shape that has the eloquence, that absolute sense of perfection and soaring beauty. I haven't succeeded in it, but in a way that's to me more inspiring than looking at a sculpture that I admire very much, because in a way I know it too much. So I find that just in learning, and even learning things, transitions, I think are very important in all art forms, but I can sometimes see a transition in literature or in a play or something and say, ah, now that really worked. And how can I learn from that? Because I felt the essence of that, because I'm in a way freer in responding. So it's not a technique. I'm not going to learn how that sculptor did that. I want to learn the essence of that transition. So anyway.
Yeah, I agree, Bruce. I think I get most of my inspiration from outside of theater these days, yeah. I think maybe it's because we've just been doing it for so long that we don't, and we're very confident in our own craft, that we don't think we need to learn any more craft. I mean that may sound arrogant.
It's probably true.
Yeah. But I recall my good friend, the filmmaker Hou Xiaoxian from Taiwan. He once told me, just a private conversation, he said, you know, I think I can do anything. I can film, I can make anything. You know, and that was when Jurassic Park came out. I said, you can make Jurassic Park? He said, I could do that with my hands tied behind my back. And then he said, now the question is, what do I want to make? Yeah. And I think this was very profound, that he could tell me that he felt that he was at a craft level, that he could do anything. But then what do you do? Yeah, and to me that is also an example of method and wisdom, and how those two things can possibly work together. For me, I recall when I was a grad student here, we lived on Smythe Fernwald, and when I was doing the laundry with my young daughter, and then always I met this guy who was in the physics department, and he would always talk to me about quantum physics while we were doing the laundry, and our daughters were playing together. Yeah, and it was so inspiring just to hear what people were saying on a deep level about anything, you know. And I find that true. I talk to businessmen who are very, very good at what they do, other artists, all sorts of people. Whoever is good at what they do, I think I can learn something from them, but not necessarily theater people anymore. It's funny. Of course, I get to meet a lot of wonderful, great artists in the theater, and then through talking, we learn a lot from each other, but not so much from seeing the work.
Interesting. A big part of what we're trying to do, both at the Arts Research Center and in this campus initiative, is enable cross-art conversation. And we have a lot of different reasons why we're trying to promote that. But I just want to flag that we have another reason, that this notion that artists actually can be more inspired by an encounter with something outside of their art form. I think that that's something that the musician who's pursuing music, and the actor who's pursuing theater, and the sculptor who's hanging out in the visual art department, I think they all need to hear that.
Well, sure, because we tend to, if it's in our own the language of our own work, we tend to copy what we've seen at work. You see, you're not seeing the essence of it when it's in your own craft, your own vocabulary. So when it's something outside of that, issues of presence, completion, resolution. You see that, I see that in another sculptor's work, and I see it how they did that, but it's not, but when I feel that in another art form, I'm going more to what's the essence of it.
Right, yeah, you're not preoccupied with the technique or the method.
And going back to what you were saying about time, I think because in the theater we tell stories, and stories take time, and stories take place in time. I think sculpture to me is more of a presence, the word you just used. It's a presence and permanence. And through that, we certainly can learn, because as we craft a story, we are actually sculpting a structure. And the structure is what really makes the story talk to people. So I do often feel like I'm a sculptor, and I have used that word when I talk to people about how I really build my plays.
And associated with narrative and story.
Yes,
Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah. One thing that I also hoped you might talk about, at least just a bit, is the fact that both of you are internationally renowned artists, which is to say that your work appears in a number of different contexts, different regions of the world, different people speaking different languages and of different cultures are encountering it. And whether you have noticed that you adjust your work in relationship to certain national cultures or regional cultures, whether there's different kinds of responses that are unexpected or different as you move to different places, different professional norms in different places, just what it is to be thinking transnationally when you're an international artist.
I'm going to be working at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, and I'm learning so much about unions.
Oh, these strange,
Rehearsals have to,
strange provincial practices.
yeah, you have to break every 55 minutes, you have to break for 5 minutes. You
So
know,
professional norms, right there, are
and you
different.
can't add rehearsals here and there, blah, 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 blah. It's, I don't know, it's a little stifling.
But it is different
It's different.
than theaters in China.
Sure, we don't have unions in Taiwan. Yeah, right. It's, well, no, but I have to respect that. And I realize how that also helps. But in a funny way, the play I'm doing, Secret Love in Peach Blossom Land, is about two theater groups who are mistakenly booked into the same theater. And that doesn't happen at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival.
Too organized.
It's too organized. They run it like a Swiss clock, you know. So I have to figure out how to make that believable. The fact that they've somehow screwed up, you know, and sort of make it interesting to them too.
Well, I think for me, first of all, I'm very much a part and come out of modernism that came out of late 19th century in Europe. Modernism not in entirely cultural, but in fine arts, visual arts, of an issue that the aesthetics is a language itself, stripped of context and politics and storyline, contrary to classic art that was linked, where the aesthetics were linked to social agreed stories. And I believe in that deeply, and I think that I probably wouldn't be an artist without that, because but that's still a battle in the West, and it's, to be honest with you, I found it more of a battle in the East. It's harder in a country, I show quite a bit in China, and there is more distance, but more resistance to the idea that there is no verbalizable story behind the imagery. And I understand that is a cultural issue. It's still difficult in our own country. The analogy I try to use with people is that abstract art is like music. Happy music isn't because it sounds like people laughing, and music that makes it sad isn't because it sounds like people crying. The music itself, that arrangement of notes, carries deep, complicated human reactions and feelings. And that is what abstraction does for me, that the shapes alone are an emotional communication. But that is a difficult concept for cultures where the art has always been linked to cultural stories. And in a way, it's kind of like going back to the 19th century and trying to argue the validity for non-narrative painting and sculpture. But I had a fun experience in China. I have a large piece that was done for the Olympics, and it stayed there in the park. And I just happened to be there the first day the park was open to the public. That big Olympic park was very restricted from and I was being filmed by a Chinese film crew, and so therefore there was a translator. It was the first day it was open, and the title of my sculpture was Gathering of the Moons, plural. And people would read that and then kind of look around and
Where's the moon?
but how can there be, and several people came and then through the translator asked me, well, could I explain the title, because there was only one moon. And I had purposely given that a little bit of a provocative title, but I would say like, well, what about the lover's moon, the new moon, the full moon, the waxing moon, the waning moon? But nevertheless, abstraction remains still, it's a battle even in the West, and it's more of the legitimacy of abstraction as a valid expression itself, not associated with any storyline, is more of a battle in Asia.
Not only is it people expect some narrative or storyline to be associated with a sculpture, they also expect some sort of message. And if you say there isn't any, they won't believe you. So you're constantly asked, what does this mean?
Or then it doesn't have any value. If it has no message, then it's without value.
Right. And I think certainly this is something cultural that takes time. It takes time.
Stan, could you, as someone who is a Taiwanese citizen who works a great deal in China, can you talk about, for the group, a little bit about what that has meant for you to be navigating some of these historic, pretty historic big conversation?
I've been doing theater for 30 years, and probably half of that time I've been working in China, maybe more. And I find people, the first time they see my work, it takes them maybe half an hour to get into what I'm trying to do. I would call it the rules of the game, because I think any director, when you present a work, you're also trying to teach the audience how to look at, how to receive your work. And so that's built into the way the play is performed. And it takes them 20 minutes, 30 minutes to understand that. And then they get into it. And then there's not much difference. I think today when a play of mine is performed in Taipei or in Shanghai, if I'm sitting backstage, sometimes I don't quite know where I am, because it could be either. The way the audience is responding is basically the same. And to them, I think, to answer your question, and to tie in with what Bruce was saying, when we did The Village in Beijing, The Village is a 3-hour play about these military villages that were temporarily built in Taiwan in 1949 when the nationalists retreated to Taiwan after the communists took over China, and then people lived there for decades. Theater people came backstage to me and they said, "How did you do that?" And I said, "How did I do what?" And then the question came, which I thought was an extremely intelligent question, which is, how did you remove yourself from it? And to me, that is the right question. I think artists in China, they're taught not to remove themselves from the work. I guess I have my roots right here in Berkeley. And I think my teachers taught me that you should remove yourself from your work. If you want to present something, if you want to make something beautiful, you can't be there. You have to find a way.
In order to
I
have
found
a formal
distance or whatever.
from the work.
But I found it very difficult to answer them, to tell them how to do it, because it's not only a question of technique, it's a question of your whole concept of what art is.
Well, I want to open it up for questions, just as a last, one last question from me before we do. I wonder if you have any last words of, we'll say, sort of wisdom that you would share with us at UC Berkeley as we're thinking about educating the next generation. Both those who want to be artists and those for whom the arts might be a lifelong love, something that might be in their lives forever. Do you have any thoughts about how we should be thinking about educating or sensitizing this next group of world citizens?
Well, boy, to be honest with you, I think the university is two roles, and they're difficult to mix, and I do sympathize with that. The professional training track is different from the broadening of the soul through exposed education to many things. And those are really, in my opinion, sort of different. And it's hard to, maybe hard to mix them, but I would actually think we'd be better off as a society if all students had more exposure to all the arts. And I don't mean just visual arts, but some, because they will be forever enriched by that. If you become a lifelong reader, you will never be bored. If you read poetry or music and painting and sculpture and dance, all of those are so enriching for a whole life that for the university to open those doors and give those experiences and that recognition, and the university is so full of teaching of fact and trade and intellectualism that to have that door kept open, I think as an artist myself, you're better to give us audiences. Artists will find themselves, and there'll be artists without art schools.
Yes.
But we need audiences, and we need audience with open hearts.
Two things come to mind. One, when I was a grad student here, I recall my last year here, Dramatic Arts brought in a Dutch director named Shireen Stroker, who became, I think, my main theater practice mentor. And she taught me how to build plays through the use of improvisation with my actors. And one day when I asked the most stupid question, I mean, I was like her apprentice, I asked, like, how did you do that? What she just did in front of me. I said, how? It just blew my mind. I said, how could you have done that? And she said, very matter-of-factly and very seriously, I know what you can do on stage and what you can't do. And to me, I think this is maybe the sternest message you can give to a young artist. Know what you can do and what you can't do. And if you don't, sorry, you're going to be in trouble. Because this is the technique side of it. If you don't know what's going to work, if you're going to think this is going to work, these days I can tell my students, they don't like to hear this, but I say if they have a certain idea or a certain way they want to do it, and I can already tell it's not going to work, then I can tell them, I say, try this, but I don't think it's ever going to work, so you might as well forget it. But they don't like to hear that, But at least to know, at least that you have to get to the stage where you know what works and what doesn't work. The second observation would be considering wisdom, which we just talked about. And I don't claim to know what wisdom is, but I know that when I teach my students or when I work with actors or with directors, I think there's a word called motivation, meaning more the reason why you're doing something, which is what Director Ho was asking me, what am I going to do, even though I know how to do everything now. I think this is the key to wisdom, some sort of a key to what wisdom is in always asking yourself, why are you here? Why do you aspire to be an artist? Because I think we just give that to people. You say, oh, you want to be an artist? Great, that's so great. But that's not necessarily, because why do you want to be an artist? And if you can truthfully answer that, sometimes it's shocking to yourself because you come face to face with the fact that you want to be an artist because of some very, perhaps, crazy or stupid or reasons that make you a very vain or arrogant person, you know, and you must understand that the true artist sort of has to rid himself of all these things, and that to me would be the path toward the wisdom we need to be artists.
All right, I wonder if there are some questions from the audience. I think we have a mic over by Lindsay.
Hi, thank you very much. I advocate for some of the more vulnerable artistic communities at times in Oakland that are maybe creating art but don't have the vehicle to put their art out there. And as abstract art sometimes has to have advocacy to push it forward, what have been some techniques advocating for your own work for people to either get it or not get it, but you still get to move it forward and have it be seen? What's worked or not worked?
You know, to be honest with you, I'm not going to give you any business advice. The best professional advice I can give you is that if you're making or pursuing any activity that is deeply within you, that it continues to stretch you, and you learn new things from, and you continue to be excited about, that is a successful artist. And whether you sell nothing or many things, that's kind of, to me, a secondary aspect. But if you're thinking about sales of work when you're making it, to be honest with you, you've just got a job. And the joys that it's not an art career is not a good business operation. And if the joys do not and rewards do not remain throughout your life, the work that you're making and your relationship with it yourself, then it's a lousy job. And most art that's made doesn't sell, and it doesn't mean that it's not good, and the paths are very complicated, but the point I'm trying to make is that that's what it's not where the rewards are.
At the same time, I did want to go back to your point about the importance of us cultivating people with open hearts. And it seems like the more we can all create a good kind of contagious love for and openness toward a great deal of work in our communities, hopefully we can have a win-win sort of reciprocal situation. So I appreciate that.
Just to add on line, I totally agree with Bruce, and I think I'm not saying you're doing this, but when artists think about selling their work while they're making it totally pollutes the work, and you can see in the work when they do that oh, it's polluted. So yeah, it's difficult.
I didn't mean sales, although I do like that point. I guess I didn't.
Formulate the question right. I meant advocating for communities that make art as a source of most survival. And how do they? So in terms of people that maybe don't get a piece of work that you do, how do you show it? Whether it gets bought or viewed, or how, there's no real word to even explain maybe what I'm asking, but when you're creating something beautiful that no one understands, how do you show it?
Yeah, or creating some kind of platform that allows for it to be circulated in some way, whether we use the word show in that professional sense.
Well, ideally, you have people aside from the artists who know how to do that. Ideally, because, but unfortunately, most of the artists have to fend for themselves, and so they have to really be thinking about all these things while they make their art, and this is very difficult. It's certainly difficult.
Yeah, so it's also partly about cultivating groups of people who have these other skills as well, that
Yes,
can
and
keep us
of
all going.
course,
keep-
I don't
Yeah.
work much in this country,
Mhm.
but I realize that it shouldn't be just your fight, you know, it should be the fight of, you know, the government should be on your side, the universities, the institutions should all be on your side. Everyone should be making an effort to be able to show art, you know, and in all different contexts, everywhere. And in America, I don't know if that happens that
Yeah.
often, yeah.
You know, I think about it even, you know, I think about our chancellor who wants, you know, the arts to be sort of integrated and into the fabric of student life on the one hand, and then we have you on the other hand saying, I know a whole lot of artists who need a place to go. And it seems like there's a chocolate and peanut butter situation, you know, it seems like it should be a little easier.
Yeah, but you know, sometimes I feel that if you have no resources at all, you can still make theater.
Mhm.
And that's the way I learned to make theater here at Berkeley. We have no budget when we're making our plays. We have a costume shop we can pull from, but that's it. And then you have a theater that we're allowed to use. And if you're making art, any space can become an exhibition space. Anywhere can be a theater. You know, to me, I think if we learn that way, that you can work on zero budget and any place can be your window, then you have a lot of chances to do it. And then the rest is all about spirit, you know, about the people coming together and doing something together, and that grows, you know. And then you can, I think it's a lot about people coming together and working together to make it happen.
Another question? There and then there.
I want to follow up on one subject that Stein talked about earlier, the creativity. So you said we're born with creativity, but later some of our life habits block our creativity. I was just wondering if you could give us one example of two, what habits block our creativity and what can we do to unblock?
Well, once I was on a Shanghai street and I saw this woman with her young son, and the son was pointing to the sky and saying, "Mom, look at that dog." And what I'm saying is very sad because the mother slapped him and said, "That's a cloud, that's not a dog." You know? And this is just a very graphic example of how I think for that boy, that was it. You know, I don't think he'd ever think creatively anymore. But we also have all these habits where, you know, in a way, in the broadest sense, concepts are what are blocking our way. But we have concepts about everything. You know, like what is this? This is a talk by Bruce and Stan, and Shannon is moderating. But how do we take away all these concepts? What is this? Is a microphone, you know, or this is an alumni house, or this is a room. How can we just take away all the labels of everything that we see? And of course, then you can see how actually frightening that can be, you know. But as an artist, we have to be able to do that, to take away the labels from all the things, and then they're liberated, and then these things can become anything. You know, they can be put together in any way to make any kind of sense that you want them to. But you first have to be able to see how things aren't exactly the way you're taught to see them.
You know, life itself is just this continuous flood of distractions. I mean, we all know that, you know, family and jobs and driving and getting from here to there, and it's pretty much uses us up. And I think that, I don't know how you learn it, but you have to clear yourself from that, either learning it or have it, I don't know where, but the clutter will just will use you up completely. Sculptors are unusual in the sense of stepping in and out of the right and the left brain. If a sculptor can't get out of the creative mode and he goes to his table saw and can't suddenly be very focused and practical and real, he'll cut his hands off. But when he goes back to working on that piece, if he can't step back into the conversation that that shape is having with him, if he continues with that, then focus on the world out there, then he can't get back into that space. So I don't know how you do that. I think it's worth talking about within and with students and with all of that to at least make them aware of it, because the default is that there's all this input coming in and it's 100% consuming. And then how do you block pieces of that, like a tunnel or some way, to stop all of that input and thought and plans and what am I going to do tomorrow and what did I, what's going on with ISIS and my wife's going to have a baby and all this stuff. It's life. But if all of that's still coming at you, if you can't turn that off, you can't make anything special.
Another question? Yeah, I think we have a few. Okay. Okay.
So you discussed some of sculpture and theater of time being a differentiating factor. But if we consider a larger parameter of sculpture, of installation, time-based works, food-based works, works made with a more impermanent materiality, I'm just wondering how else we might define that difference between theater and installation or theater and sculpture, because I think there can be a lot of overlaps. And I'm also wondering on the second half of that, if there might be some places where you might see uncomfortable mergings that are like cross-media mergings that start to not work.
Well, when I talked about myself, first of all, I don't do installations, but that doesn't mean that I reject that as a perfectly valid, aspect of sculpture. But I do think that there is a danger of putting the superficial parts of different disciplines and trying to think that you're just kind of getting the best of both, because real resolution and authority that any really successful work of art has to have isn't just casually transferable. And I'm not in any way saying that that can't be, but there is a little tendency sometimes to think, well, I'll just take a piece of this and a piece of that, and this new mixture will be richer for that. And it's difficult to do because real mastery, as Stan said, you really have to know what you're doing, and you can't take a piece of something else and just kind of put it on. I'm not saying it can't happen.
Yeah, and I think there's a basic difference between the viewer of theater and the viewer of sculpture, because theater, most theater, takes place in a set time, in a set place. But for sculpture, you're there and you create the time you are with the sculpture, with the piece. We can't quite do that in theater. We have, because we're controlling the time frame. Of course, there are pieces that are much more open-ended on that way, and then those pieces then become much more like sculpture.
And those, and to Anne's question, it's partly about, so those intermedial experiments, some are really interesting and some maybe don't work. But there is, I think, something about opening up performance so that the audience member controls the time. Scary proposition, but interesting if it works. Vice versa. Okay, I think we have more questions, Lance, and then we'll get another person here.
Can you hear me? I wanted to follow up on this question of time and actually collaboration. And what you talked about in terms of sculpting the work, we tend to talk, certainly in sculpture, we're talking about a work that exists over time. It is. And in theater and other performance arts, it's not only it's in time, it doesn't exist, it exists through time, not in time. But there's also this element, like a Zen garden, you can continue to kind of rake it, because you have collaborative artists that you're working with as well. And I'm interested in the creative process from each of your perspectives because you're coming at the work, even though it's very different as it exists over time and in time, in terms of one working in isolation almost from beginning to end, but also a process which I'm assuming, Bruce, it's not just a work that's done, but it's a process that continues in terms of your own raking of a garden, but that's a question, continuing in a kind of series as you continue to explore the kind of space and the kind of figures that you're creating. And Stan, for you, in terms of both the isolated part of it, which is when you're creating initially the work, and the process then when you enter into a more public domain of working with other artists, and then the feedback that continues through the work, just as you're going to do in China. Anyway, that's my question.
So that to some degree, you're working on the same forms in different series, in different iterations.
Yes, and what happens with that is it's a piece gives you an idea for another piece. And when that continues to happen, then sometimes we call that a series or a style or whatever. For myself, as long as one piece leads me to another one, gives me an idea that's sort of like, oh, well, you know, I can still say something, I can say something different with this. In a way, I think that what you're doing is, what I feel I'm doing is discovering a new language that first I'm learning, and it's a language of a certain relationship of shapes. And as long as that language is interesting to me, and I feel that I'm discovering new things I can say in it, then I'm interested in pursuing that still within that language. When I find myself kind of saying, well, you know, what else do I have to say in this? Then I usually start looking for something else. So when it doesn't lead to another, then I know it's time to move on.
One aspect of the question may not be answering your question, but you made me think of the way I work. I find sculpturally is that I don't write a play and then rehearse it. I write an outline, and then working with the actors, I build the play. So when I'm doing that, when I'm building the play in the rehearsal studio, I find that I must let go of myself. So I'm conducting the rehearsal, but I'm not. It's like a meditation. It's like when I let go of myself, then I'm in total contact with the work itself. And I'm sure, Bruce, that's probably what you do when you're sculpting, is that there's something that you have to get into the work. You have to get into the piece. Yeah, and the way to get into the piece, for me, is to let go of it. You know, it's a kind of strange contradiction, but maybe that's what you're talking about when they're raking the Zen garden also. If you rake it with a purpose, it probably doesn't come out too well. And when you throw away the purpose, then some greater purpose seems to appear.
Another question? Okay, we have one there, and then we'll get the next one up here. Yeah.
Hi.
I think, yeah, come here.
Hi. Thank you both for your thoughts and creativity. It's been really inspiring. I have a bit of a selfish question, and I'm a composer, and I've been recently interested in more like multimedia, intermedia, collaborative type things. And frankly, when you talk about creativity, as you said, there's a skill, there's an affinity that's necessary, and there's a human limit, right, to how many things we can have skills for. And mine is really only for sound, and yet trying to do cross-disciplinary art in academia where everything's supposed to be a solo experience, I find that I'm doing a lot of very mediocre work. What recommendations do you have for cross-disciplinary artists, or do you think it really should all be collaborative?
Well, first of all, I don't believe that you can't be good at many things. You can be. You know, you can get the skills for all the disciplines you want to work in. It just takes time, and you have to spend that time and master your craft at all of them. And of course, what you're doing is a field in itself, you know. And so there's difficulty in that. Sometimes I find young artists tend to like to do something that is, you know, cross borders, cross-cultural, whatever. And in a way, they do that as a means to sort of hide their inadequacies, you know. I'm not saying you do, I don't know your work, I'm sure you don't, but sometimes it's a convenient way of saying, you know, sort of masking yourself and saying, look at all these things I'm doing. But I really believe that if you're really good at one thing, then the other things come too. Bruce is, I'm sure, is very modest in saying that in music he's just a listener, but I bet that Bruce probably understands music more than most people on this planet, you know, because he's a sculptor. Yeah.
So it is going back to those earlier comments about being inspired by other art forms. Yeah.
Yeah, but I think that one thing that artists that achieve things have a lot of focus, and I just think that is a real aspect. And you do see young artists that are dripping with talent, and they just can't focus. And you know, you just can't go anywhere without that. I mean, it's just the truth. The work will never arrive at a point of real excellence if you don't have a pretty strong focus, because it's a scattergun otherwise. And I don't know, in my experience, that's just the way it is.
May I take that one step farther, saying that what I interpret as focus goes back to what I'm saying about motivation. Why are you doing what you do? And may I venture to say that I think for an artist, it's a constant struggle to be doing something selfishly for yourself, or to be doing something totally non-selfishly for others. So can the piece of art that you're making, can it be a total gift to the world with no thought of any whatever for yourself, like glory or sales or whatever, reviews or whatever? Can you do that? I don't think it's possible to be 100% either way, but I think this is something it's a gauge that you can think about when you're doing your art. How much is it for yourself and how much is it for others? And for me, I always think, when I ever think this way, I think that the more that it's for others, the better it is and the better the work is.
And maybe we can take a last question. Yeah.
Thank you. You know, every time you say something, I have another question. So, Stan, your last words that you just said, I'm hearing that even if you experienced rejection during the journey of your life, you still would be doing what you're doing. I'm going to say yes to that.
Yes.
And I guess Bruce too, because it is being an artist in any format, from what I've read and what I learned from writers and musicians and visual artists, it's a total spiritual sacrifice. It's a dedication. And I truly believe that it's going to take, well, you used the word curiosity. Yes, you have to have curiosity, but you have to have courage. And you have to make choices. And you give up other things that are not important to you, because that passion is your oxygen. And, you know, I mean, I need all the arts. I need the music, and whatever format it comes in, it inspires in such a way that's magical, you know. And I mean, hearing all of your comments touches on different elements of life that you might not be a famous artist like the two of you, but the joy that you get from appreciating and being a part of, you know, the journey of creativity is endless. And I think at the end, it's the most spiritual gift you're going to get in life. You know, be it religion, be it meditation. I don't know how you can live without it. So I thank you. You know, I thank you for touching on so many things. But in the big picture, there's so few that can sacrifice everything without having enough food to eat. So if you can balance, you got it made. And, you know, you make your choices. Thank you.
Thank you. I think sometimes I think, though, that our work is overly romanticized. You know, in one way, I do what I do because I think I'm good at what I do. and therefore I'm doing it. And if I wasn't good at what I'm doing, then, you know, I think I would continually be, you know, pushed away from doing it, and maybe in the end stop doing it. I don't know.
I don't think you don't have a choice. I think you're
You know,
born.
I want to emphasize that I think that, you know, I don't feel proud that I've made good sculptures. The sculptures are a result of something. And it's the relationship of that discovery is what I care about, but I don't feel like, wow, I made a pretty good sculpture. It's the works, you know, they're their own thing. They have their own life and their own personality. It's the path, it's the quest of the sculpture that's interesting. And if that itself wasn't worth it, wasn't the payoff, I wouldn't do it, because otherwise it's a lousy job. I mean, it's not, and in some ways it sounds very selfish to say that you're spending your life just kind of keeping this interest of this path, this discovery, this exploration. But that's really what it is for me. It's not the end result. It's not how many sculptures there are in the end. It's, did I remain interested doing that? And because when I'm doing that, there is something that happens. It's just the best thing that happens. But it's inside me what that best thing is. And then it's just by luck if there's something that comes out of that other people like to see.
I tend to think that our works become a way of humbling ourselves. To start with, when you're a young artist and your works are seen and people say good things about them, they're a source of vanity. You feel good, you get praised. But then I think as you grow older, you really look more carefully at, is your work influencing other people in a good way? And if it's not, then you should really think about what you're doing. So as I say, it humbles you. And particularly sometimes if your work is very well received, I think you should feel even more humility and say, well, you know, as Bruce just said, there's a huge luck factor in that, because we put in everything to what we do. And whether or not you like it or not, you know, it's so flaky, you know. Sometimes the work we do, I think this wasn't a very great play. Wow, that was the greatest thing we ever saw. And sometimes you put all this work in, you think this is the greatest thing, and people don't quite understand it. And you also have to learn, that's okay too. You know, that's okay. In the end, are we good judges of what we do? And what we do, how does that reflect or benefit the people who see it? I think that's the important thing.
Bruce and Stan, thank you for your commitment to these pursuits, for your humility, for your courage, for staying curious, and for being with us for a wonderful evening. Thank you.
Thank you.